Just getting ready to start.
Welcome. We have a really exciting panel today. I know I could easily spend a couple of hours asking questions of either of these guys on their own. We'll do the best we can in an hour and two of you. So we have Ryan North and Luen Yang. I'm going to go ahead and give introductions for them. That's probably not particularly necessary, but it's procedure. Ryan North has been pushing the structural boundaries of comics since he launched Dinosaur Comics in 2003. Followed by other odd experiments in webcomics. He's the author of To Be or Not to Be, the Choose Your Own Hamlet. Co-editor of 2 volumes of prose science fiction, Machine of Death and This Is How You Die. And he has been the writer for the Adventure Time comics series and the Unbeatable Squirrel Girl for Marvel. He also wrote the original graphic novel, The Midas Flesh, which is a completely bonkers space epic featuring dinosaur astronauts versus Greek mythology. Can't go on with that. Luen Yang is the author of the classroom staple, American-Born Chinese. And the shadow hero, and I realize I have a PowerPoint with images of all of these things, and I completely forgot. So I'm going to pause a moment. I'm interrupting my introduction of Gene to actually show you some of Ryan's stuff. This is Midas Flesh, which is illustrated by Shelley Caroline and Braden Lamb. There's one of our dinosaur scientists. Unbeatable Squirrel Girl, which opens with a 2-page musical number. And then she fights Galactus. And then we get to Gene. Here's American-Born Chinese, which I already mentioned. Apologies for the out of order here. As well as the Shadow Hero, a reimagining of the first very obliquely Asian-American superhero. And the 2-book opus, Boxers and Saints, which is just an amazing series if you haven't read that yet. Here we have Joan of Arc appearing. And I think this is the most recent one, Secret Coders, an adventure in computer programming. As well as, I don't have an image for but he's also now writing Superman.
Who?
I know, he decided to go take it a little low-key for this one. His books are largely stories for young readers, though with broad age appeal, and a frequent focus on the Asian American experience. He's won an Eisner, a Prince, and is a National Book Award nominee. Actually, we're both Eisner winners, right? Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to stop distracting myself with PowerPoint now. And all mics working.
Hello. Hello?
Hello. Is this one? Oh, there it goes. Okay. All right. Okay, so both of you are largely writing comics for, although not exclusively for, younger readers. And I think there has just been a tremendous amount of wonderful work coming out for younger readers over the past decade or so, and then I think American Born Chinese was among the first wave of that. And of course, we're all familiar with the stereotype of comics are for kids, which was, frustrating in large part because during the entire time that stereotype existed, there were hardly any comics for kids. And now that's finally changing, and there finally are comics for kids. And this has coincided very much with comics for adults starting to become taken more seriously. And so I'm wondering if you think there's any relationship between the fact that comics for kids are getting so much better at the same time as people are finally taking comics for adults more seriously.
I think comics are just growing in general in this country. I feel like if you look at all the major comic book cultures in the world, there's one in Japan, there's one in Europe, it's kind of based out of France, and then us. We've been the laggards, right? We've been the ones that have been pulling the tail end because for so long our comics have only been dominated by one genre. It's a genre that I love, but even though I love it, I don't want it to be the only thing I get to read in comic book format. And I feel like the fact that there are now there's now this section of really good comics for kids at your local bookstore is just part of a broader movement of diversifying the medium in every sense of the word diverse.
Yeah, which is great. I always have this idea, this imaginary town where there is just one movie theater and all it shows is romantic comedies. And you grow up in that town and you go to the movie theater a couple times, like, man, it's always the same thing. And you'd be forgiven after 30 years of that, being like, I guess I just don't like movies if you don't like romantic comedies.
Yeah.
And I feel like North America's been long with like superhero comics and like Archie comics and like newspaper Garfield comics. And if you didn't like all those, you're like, I guess I don't like comics. And it was so hard for me because I used to get emails saying I love Dinosaur Comics, and it's crazy because I don't like comics, but I like your comic. And I'd be like, it's a surprise, like you like comics. Like you're reading as a comic. And it's recently been a lot better. There's, like you're saying, more diverse stories, characters, creators, and it results in, I feel, people recognizing that comics is a medium, not a genre, and you can do anything in comics. Like saying I don't like novels. I don't like books. Seems like a crazy thing to say.
I know I know. At Comic-Con, some dude came up to me and told me, I was like, check this out. He's like, I don't really read books.
Alright, maybe it's not such a crazy example. Maybe someone saying, I don't like movies. I don't know, I just think it's weird to dismiss a whole medium.
Yeah, it is. It is. Absolutely.
You can do anything in it.
Yeah.
I want to talk about, you're talking about comics for kids. I sort of always draw a line between all ages and for kids. Because I feel comics for kids always has this element of it's almost talking down, like, oh, this is for kids, like pat on the head, go to the kids' table. Well, all ages, like my secret to all ages is you write as you normally would, and everyone keeps their clothes on. And then, like, it's just sort of, I don't think children are big dummies. I feel like they're clever and they can understand the stuff that we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of it is you can't assume, like when writing for kids, you can't assume certain types of prior knowledge.
Yeah, everything's fresh.
Yeah, everything's fresh, exactly. Which actually, in some ways, is a lot more challenging than writing for adults, right? Where you can kind of assume like a common cultural experience that you can draw from. With kids, you can't have that.
It also means that some of the stuff you'll be doing, it'll be their first time experiencing that thing.
Yeah. So you can go cliche.
Yeah, like that guy's and they grow up, it's like, wait a minute.
So you mentioned diversity already, and that is one of the things I want to talk about. I think you both in your work show clear sensitivity to the current interest in improving diversity in comics, and there's definitely been movement on that lately. I think I would say I think more quickly with gender diversity than with racial diversity or ethnic diversity. But either way, my impression is that it's moving much faster in comics aimed primarily at younger readers, and I'm deliberately choosing aimed at younger readers rather than just calling it kids' comics. But I think that movement has been happening much faster in those comics than in the comics that are primarily read by adults. And I'm curious whether you guys think there might be a reason for that, why this is working so much better.
I think some of it comes with that freshness that we were just talking about, right? I think, like I said, I love superhero comics. I grew up on superheroes. I love superhero comics. But a lot of what we think of, at least, as superhero comics is driven on nostalgia. And kids just are not old enough to have nostalgia, right? So, I'm gonna go super nerdy now, super superhero-y nerdy. But you know Green Lantern? You know, like that Green Lantern character? For a generation, the most prominent Green Lantern character was an African-American, John Stewart. Not John Stewart, the Navy show. John Stewart, a military guy who got a power ring. And then they eventually reverted, and they made the white guy, Hal Jordan, the most prominent Green Lantern. I don't think that switch back was racially motivated at all. I think it was driven by nostalgia. You know,
the creators are like, I grew up on Hal Jordan.
Exactly. I have emotional attachments to Hal
even though he's really boring.
Yeah. Yeah, like he's, out of all the Green Lanterns out there, that's the most boring one that you could shoot. And kids just don't have that. They don't have that attachment that adults do.
Yeah. I also think in a way, it's not hard to have more diverse characters, especially in comics. You just have to draw them differently. And it's not a huge deal. Squirrel Girl gets a lot of praise for having body diversity because Squirrel Girl, to a degree, doesn't have the classic superhero physique. And for some people, this is like a revolutionary act. Like people are very angry that she looks differently now. She doesn't look like a supermodel. She has a different body. And some people are really upset at that. And it's like, this is just one character. And the comics in which she was drawn that way still exist. Like, we're not taking anything away. But now she looks like other people might look. Not everyone has a supermodel physique. And that's fine. I don't have one, but I think I look pretty good.
I have these good looks though, dude.
But I feel like representation for it, like seeing characters who look like you is really powerful. It says, this comic is not just, like this comic concludes, this comic is not for other people, it's also for you. And I mean, I'm a heterosexual white guy, so I get a lot of representation in media. But I feel like it's important for people who don't happen to be heterosexual white guys to also see themselves in stories. And it's not hard. Right? It's not impossible to do.
I think comics is a perfect medium for that, right? In prose, sometimes you have to do a couple of tricks with words in order to get a person's sense in a way that's smooth,
in a way that's graceful,
right?
and not just
and not just shoving
them.
it in.
Yeah.
But comics, it's just as soon as they walk on panel, that's it.
I'm surprised to hear that there were that many people with such strong attachments to the original Squirrel Girl. I hadn't actually heard of the character until you revamped her, yeah.
It was funny. I knew of her, and so I got an email from Marvel saying, "Do you give us a pitch for Squirrel Girl? You have the weekend." And I'm like, "Oh no, Squirrel Girl. I don't know." And then I spent the weekend, reading all her comics and reading her history and stuff. And at the end of the weekend, I knew that I really wanted it to be a Squirrel Girl comic, and I really wanted to be the guy writing it. So I sent this pitch for the comic I wanted to write, and luckily that was also the comic they wanted to publish.
That's a good arrangement.
Yeah. I really thought they'd say no, because I was like, I want Squirrel Girl to fight Galactus and win in her first arc. And they said, sure.
Okay, this is going back a bit more specifically to Gene. Your work has always had a degree of an educational bent to it, whether that's aiming for specific practical skills like in secret coding, or whether it's more directly exploring social and identity issues like American-born Chinese does. But your work is thoroughly entertaining. And I'm curious, how do you find that balance between entertaining your reader and actually keeping them thinking about the core concept that you've chosen to engage them with?
Well, thank you. I mean, I don't know. I feel like, so I was a high school teacher for 17 years. I'm an older brother. I like telling people what to do naturally. I constantly have to fight it. You know what I mean? I constantly have to fight it. So I appreciate you saying that. I don't know if everybody agrees with you. I think sometimes, like, my stuff comes off as didactic. And I can see it, too. Like, when I reread the stuff that I wrote in the past, I was like, oh my god, I'm like a jerk, right? But it's definitely something I try to fight. In college, I did a creative writing minor. I did this one class with a novelist by the name of Thaisa Frank, which really changed the way I thought about things. And for her, she said that you shouldn't approach your stories with a message. You shouldn't approach your stories with any kind of goal. It should just be about writing from your life. And whatever the messages are that are important to you in your life, just kind of come out. You know, and that's sort of what I've tried to follow. Except for Secret Coders.
Yeah.
Secret Coders is me like straight up. I'm gonna try to twist this out to you.
I do feel like there's a big difference between making something educational by putting a message in it and saying, here's the thing you're meant to learn, versus something that is to me more authentically educational in that it's, here's a question that you should be thinking about, which I feel is the type of educational content that we get in your work, aside from Secret Coders.
Well, that might be my saving grace, is that I am very ambivalent. Right? Like for politics, I can't ever make sense of politics because what I'll do is I'll read one article and I'll be like, yeah, that dude is right, and then I'll read another one and I'll be like, no, this one's right.
Well, that defines Boxers and Saints.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
that's what
The reason why Boxers and Saints is in 2 volumes is because as I was researching the Box Rebellion, looking for a hero, I couldn't decide which side I felt more sympathy for. So I had to do both. Like even now, I feel like when I think about that whole historical incident, I just feel ambivalent. It's like my indecision. Like I'm like this at the grocery store too. two brands of orange juice. I just can't do it.
It's rare that ambivalence results in something so powerful. Well, there you go.
I appreciate that.
But that's important to giving context to history. Is that it's not divisible into heroes and villains.
Yeah. Usually.
There are some notable exceptions.
Yeah, there are some people who are pretty villainish. I guess maybe even then they're like 99% villain. Maybe there's 1% hero.
They're like pet dogs sometimes.
Yeah.
For Ryan, your work is clearly just absolutely entertaining, and that's clearly your first priority. But at the same time, and I think you touched on this already, you kind of anticipated my question a little bit, but you clearly credit your readers with a high intelligence, and you've just got layers on layers of these jokes going on, and sophisticated formal structures. Like, I don't know if you took a look at that Adventure Time spread that I put up, which was this ridiculously complex choose-your-own adventure structure with like a dozen different directions to go just in those 2 pages. And all of this is packed into comics aimed at younger readers. So how do you find the limit of how far you can push your readers along a conceptual thread for the sake of a gag?
That's a good question. Well, you look at that Choose Your Adventure style issue for Adventure Time, and the way it's structured is the first time those choices show up, you have an option, it splits into 2, and they rejoin at the bottom of the page, so you can't possibly mess it up. And it teaches you how to read it. And then the next is a 2-page spread that, again, joins out, but merges at the end. So you can read across the page barrier, and we figured this out. The next spread, it splits into 2, and those go off the page. And so it's really training the reader to do it before you throw them onto the spread you have where it looks like madness. By the time they get there, they can figure out their way through the story. But I don't know, I was thinking, we're talking about education in comics. There's a part in Squirrel Girl 6, I think, where we visit one of Doreen's lectures. And the teacher is actually teaching computer science in that scene. He's talking about asset databases and the reasons we care about consistency and things like that. And it works with the plot, but there's a little note on the page saying, you know, if you ever want to pass yourself off as a computer scientist at a party, just mention what they were talking about ACID databases, and you'll be fine. I'm not sure how useful that is for like a 6-year-old, but it might be useful. And I would love to have a 6-year-old about me like, you know, durability is important.
Brian, I hate to tell you, but only 6-year-olds have eyes good enough to be able to read.
But, you know, reading books when I was younger, there were parts I didn't understand. But I wasn't baffled. Like, oh, well, let's figure this out. And maybe that's something that they're interested in. Like, oh, what other properties do databases have? Like, that's, I guess that maybe a 6-year-old wouldn't say what other properties. But it shows you that computers store information in a certain way. And that way is predictable and understandable. It can be done in different ways. And I don't know, I feel like it's just, the world is so big and crazy, and you can show parts of it to readers, and they can see what interests them and sort of follow off in that direction.
I'm also really interested in your work, and this was something that occurred to me after I even made my list of questions. But I was thinking over the work and realizing that so many of your conflicts are resolved by someone just making a compelling argument. And that's true it's true in Midas Flesh, and it's true in Unbeatable Squirrel Girl.
Yeah, I didn't realize that was mine.
And well, I was going to ask, is this a deliberate choice you're making, or what brings you to that idea for resolving an action adventure?
Yeah. I mean, we can talk about this because superheroes as a genre is crazy. Because a successful superhero comic has people punching each other. But most conflicts in real life don't get resolved through fistfights. Most you have an action-packed life. But like when I'm at the grocery store and I think they shortchanged me, I say, hey, I think you shortchanged me. It'll be like, now we're going to throw down. But then writing Squirrel Girl, I want there to be conflict. I want there to be like fun action adventure. But I felt it sort of seemed kind of contrary to the character, to Doreen, to solve all her problems by just seeing who's stronger and brushing their heads off. But that actually, my editor gave me that. He was, my first draft of the first issue, in the published version, she fights Craven and she imagines all these different ways she could beat him. And one of them is stuffing squirrels down his pants until he leaves. That was actually the first draft. She stuffed squirrels down his pants until he leaves. My editor, Will Moss, was saying, you know, I always saw Doreen as this person who would kind of solve the actual issue. And it felt like reading the answer key at the back of the textbook. I was like, of course that's who she is. I don't know, like, you find writing Superman that you want to.
Writing Superman is hard.
He's got a lot of powers.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the reasons, right? It's to prepare for Superman. I read a bunch of really early Superman comics from the 1930s and 40s, and he's always been like in the beginning, especially like later on, he turned into like everybody's favorite uncle. But in the beginning, he was kind of a badass. He was like kind of mean. He was like. Wouldn't be very opposed to being really violent. There's this one scene where, and he was always the bullier of bullies. So
which is great.
Yeah, it is. There's this one story where he finds these landlords that are ripping off their tenants. So he just takes them and he leaves them on an island of starving.
Where these bad guys were shooting bullets at him, and so these really bad guys, and so super speed, he grabbed them. And then put them in half their own bullets.
That was the original Superman. That's how he became a global icon. So I found
So you're bringing that back?
well, there are definitely limits. But I feel like the physicality of doing that kind of stuff has to be a part of that character, right? And it's exactly it. Like I think as somebody who grew up reading superhero comics, I feel like I'm kind of numb to superhero fistfights. So it's been difficult to find interesting ways of presenting that.
And usually, like the superheroes and the comics with the villains, there's more than just you stole the gold and you shouldn't have done that. There's a philosophical conflict.
Hopefully.
And it's rare you can resolve a philosophical conflict with heat vision.
Yes.
Or squirrels.
I guess the hard thing about it is trying to find the philosophical reason for the heat vision, right?
Right.
And that's
Yeah, that's not hard.
So related to this, you've also both had the experience of taking on, after all of your independent works, now you've both moved into taking on these licensed properties. And you've both done very high-profile, well-known, have to stick to a certain range of stories type of characters with Superman and Adventure Time. And you've both taken on characters that are relatively unknown and that you could revamp and reimagine in your own way with Squirrel Girl and the Green Turtle. So I'm curious about the relative appeal of taking on someone else's material in those two different modes.
With Adventure Time, it was really easy because I already was a fan of the show. And so I knew like what I wanted to hit. And it was also really easy in that it kind of wore in the rest of Cartoon Network theoretically had vetoes at every step of approval and never used them. Either was like hitting the note every time and they're like, it's fine. But there, my main concern was making it feel authentic. Because I remember reading, this is really nerdy, I read a bunch of Star Trek tie-in novels. And some of them, you could tell the authors hadn't done their homework enough. And they picked stuff that was wrong, right? They're like, the warp engines don't work that way. And it takes out the story. So my main goal is having that would tie into the TV show and feel like it was essential and authentic, which means not making mistakes and not. I used Jake's powers very deliberately because I saw the restrictions of his powers. My first theory was in the show he couldn't make shapes that had holes in them, and then he did that and said, okay, well, I can do this in the comic. And then he made a vehicle with an axle. I was like, all right, well, he can make complex machinery, so I can do this. I didn't want to do that at first because I was worried that Reed would be like, wait a minute, an axle requires technology that Jake hasn't formed before, and this is not authentic. But for Squirrel Girl, we really just went back to her first appearance, where she was really weird. Weird character, and there's a heart to her. Like she wants to be a superhero, and so she's like, well, I'm going to be Iron Man's sidekick. And then meets Iron Man and is like, I'm your new sidekick. Absolutely, this is happening. I like the confidence there and the sense that, yeah, I can do it because look at me, I'm Squirrel Girl, I'm clearly awesome. And that felt like was really the core of the character, sort of played that up. And then gave her a new costume because we felt the old costume was maybe intentionally bad. Trying to make it better. It's hard with funny characters to tell like what's a joke and what's serious.
Well, I guess Superman's hard. What makes it hard is that he's gone through so many different iterations throughout the years. So it's hard to figure out what iteration to draw from, And because he is kind of like, even though Batman outsells Superman and has for years, Superman is still the, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we are living in a Batman society.
Post-Superman society.
Yeah, post-Superman, exactly. Post-Superman society. But he's still the corporate icon. He's the Batman still has more elbow room, just like Donald Duck has more elbow room than Mickey Mouse does. Batman has more elbow room than Superman does. So all of those things have been it's been a challenge. It's definitely been a challenge. I do feel really lucky. I'm part of a Superman team that I love. I really enjoy working with my editor there. And Superman is popular enough that there are 4 titles with him in it. So I coordinate with 3 other writers in order to figure out what we're doing. But part of it is just trying to see how far you can push it without destroying the core of who he is. That's what we're trying to do with the current story. We'll see if we get it right or wrong.
Let's see if we destroy Superman.
And I'd like to hear about the process for the Green Turtle also,
sure.
for the Shadow Hero, which I think very few people were familiar with that character before you brought him back. For those of you who haven't read this one, it was this character was a Chinese American, Chinese American creator who was told he was not allowed to create a Chinese American hero. Supposedly.
Yeah, we don't know for sure.
So instead of making the character clearly Chinese or clearly not Chinese, it's this entire superhero story where the hero never shows his face at all, and he's walking around
yeah, it's a weird thing. I first read about this character named Green Turtle dating back to the 1940s on a blog called Pappy's Golden Age blogzine, where he highlights these really obscure characters from the early days of superhero comics. In this one blog, he talks about the Green Turtle, which is rumored, he's rumored to be the first Chinese-American superhero. He was done by this guy named Chu Hing, who nobody remembers anymore, but he was one of the first Asian Americans in the American comic book scene. He did a little bit of work for Marvel, and then he kind of disappeared. Green Turtle was, Chu Hing created Green Turtle for a small company called Rural Home, which nobody remembers anymore either. I think they went defunct in just a couple of years. But the Green Turtle is not a very well-conceived superhero. He is kind of a Batman ripoff. He operates out of a cave. He drives a turtle-shaped airplane. and he has like one of the most goofy costumes ever. He has a cowl, and then he has this big green cape, and then he has gloves, Speedos, boots, and that's it. Bare-chested, bare-thighed, really cute. But the interesting thing about this character is exactly as Alexander said. There's a rumor that Chu Hing wanted his character to be Asian American, he himself was. But his publishers supposedly wouldn't let him do it. So Chu Hing reacts really passive-aggressively. He's a comic book guy, right? So he reacts really passive-aggressively. He draws these early comics so that you never see the character's face. There's only one instance where you do. But outside of that, his face is almost always covered in shadow, or he's punching and his face is like this. Or like there's a piece of furniture and it's right there. And the rumor is he did this so that he could imagine his character as he originally intended, as an Asian American. He wasn't very popular, surprisingly. Green Turtle was not very popular. It only lasted 5 issues. And Chu Hing never actually gets around to telling us his origin story. Like every time, he has this little sidekick named Burma Boy, who was named after the Burma Road. It was a really big deal in World War II. But Burma Boy will constantly ask him, how did you become the Green Turtle? And then he'll be about to say it, and then be back out. You'll never find out. You never find out if he's actually Asian American. You never find out who he was. So I teamed up with a friend of mine named Sunny Liu, amazing cartoonist, and we created an origin story for this character. And we were able to do it because he's in the public domain now.
I would love to know, because it's one of my favorite superhero-mother relationships. Where did the idea come from that he becomes a superhero because that's what mom wants, and we have this very complicated mother-child relationship through the rest of this superhero action-adventure story?
Yeah, the story is set in the late 1930s. His mom is an immigrant, and she gets this idea that her son really needs to be a superhero. She sees a superhero flying over her, and then this becomes her dream for her kid. So she's constantly like pushing her kid to become a superhero. And the kid just wants to be a grocer. But she was inspired. Like people have asked me if she's like my mom, and my mom is actually a lot nicer than she is. She was more inspired by these ladies I knew at church. I went to a Chinese Catholic church growing up. There were these ladies who were very well-meaning, they were very caring, but they also had really strong opinions about what they should do with your life.
So I would say that you're both very writerly comics writers, if that makes sense, in that you have very clear narratives. They're well structured. They're well thought out from start to finish. It never feels like you're winging anything. There's a through line. Doesn't mean you aren't, but you have the writerly skill to hide it. And so I'd like to hear about your writing process, how you go from conceiving an idea to executing it.
Sure. With Adventure Time, I would send them outlines, pitches for the next 4-issue arc. And those pitches would be a paragraph long, like a sentence per issue, just about. And then I would write the comic, and I would usually ignore my outline. And I'd go off in crazy directions, which was fine. They were for some reason, cool with that. But that meant the writing process was a lot of sort of exploring where the story's going. I had a rough idea, but I'd change it all the time. And with Marvel, they want much more detailed outlines. So I'm doing like a page per issue. And I ended up changing my writing process. I used to just start writing a comic, and I'd finish when I filled out the pages I had filled up. And that would work. I do a lot of rewriting, get things to fit. And for the last couple of Squirrel Girl issues, I've actually done the outline and then outline everything page by page. So on this page, this happens, this happens, this happens. And it's great because now, when I write a page, that page is pretty much done. Where before I'd write a page and it would be great, then I'd realize, oh shoot, I need 4 more pages in this issue. I need to compress some stuff. lose all this work. It just was a lot of spinning my wheels. So it's really just towards the goal of having a story that makes sense, that has a nice arc in the issue, and that reaches a conclusion or a cliffhanger at the right point. Because comics are expensive, and I want the book to be worth it. I don't want to. I'd hate to read a comic and feel like, oh, this was, the middle section of the story, and nothing happened, and I feel like I wasted my money. So I want action-packed stuff to happen in the issues. I don't know, it's such an expensive hobby.
It is. It's crazy expensive now. Yeah. I feel like it's definitely outpaced inflation, right?
Yeah.
Like by a lot. I don't even know why that happened. When did that happen?
I don't know.
Did people get like way more expensive or something?
Well, that's what they were telling us in the late 90s.
Yeah.
They were actually saying that. I don't believe that was really entirely it.
It was just yeah, it's crazy. I can't believe how expensive.
But it's one of the reasons I put little messages at the bottom of the page, because then I feel like, someone reads a comic and it costs them $4. But they're like, well, he did stuff some jokes literally in the margins. He's really trying to get
Educators does it.
Yeah, it's like, they're
I'm gonna start doing that.
That's a great idea. Actually, from a writing perspective, it is great because you got the page and the page is done. And then you get that one little joke at the bottom. And I feel like if the rest of the page was horrible, you get a little joke over. But it only works for comedy books. Like Superman couldn't be that goofy.
Well, I could make him punch somebody in the margin. So you'll get 22 punches.
That'd be great. Then it's just like just an expedition scene. At least at the bottom he's punching someone.
Yeah, this page is mentioned Dark Side, Joker.
I have to insist that you do this.
I'll dedicate it to Ryan North.
Jane, could we hear about your writing process?
Yeah, I do an outline as well. It sounds like my outlines are kind of like the outlines that you do for Marvel. They're fairly detailed. For a graphic novel of maybe 200 pages, I'll do an outline that's anywhere from 4 to 6 pages long, single spaced. And then for my first second stuff, I mean, I guess I get approval. I send it into the editor, but I feel like I can talk him out of anything, right, that I want. And he's a cartoonist himself, Mark Siegel, so I really trust his feedback. I also work with Calista Brill for a second too. She's not a cartoonist, but she has the brain of one. For my Avatar comics, they go through Mike and Brian, who are the creators of the show, and I'll get feedback from them. And then after that gets approved, I'll write. And I'll do something similar to you. Like, I'll put my outline away, so I won't look at it.
Yeah.
And then I'll write. And I feel like doing the outline, even if 99% of the time the story ends up different from what the outline's like. But having that outline there, knowing that I reached some kind of an ending, gives me confidence that I'll reach some kind of an ending.
You're not going to get a dead end.
Yeah, even if it's different from what it was in the outline.
Do you find your outlines? I've read over some of my outlines after writing a comic, and they're really embarrassing. Because it's like this breathless 2-year-old saying, this happens, and then this happens, and there's no jokes or anything, it's just a really horrible plot outline. Like the story's good, but there's no style to it, it's just this happens.
Yeah, it's not about style, right? It's like vomiting words on a page.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm glad I'm not the only one that felt like
Yeah, I think that's just the way it has to be. Like, I feel like that's your. I mean, it's like the first draft of whatever it is you're doing. It's gotta suck.
The first outline I sent in for Adventure Time, with the email I wrote, I promise there's going to be jokes. This outline sounds horrible, but there'll be jokes, I promise.
Are your processes similar when you're working on something original like Midas Flesh or Boxers and Stings as compared to the licensed titles you're working on?
Midas was different for me because it was always going to be an 8-issue story. And I really wanted those 8 issues to work. So I did all my other work early, and then I spent 2 months just working on Midas so that I could write the issues, and if we needed something to work for the ending, I could go and set that up after issue 1 if I needed to, which was a great trick. I guess that's why novelists exist, because you control the text the whole way. That was different for me. I've done that before or since, but I'd like to do it again. It really felt like this is now a unified work. And when you're doing something serially, like you can play with stuff you've done before, but sometimes it's not as perfect as you would
Yeah,
like.
like foreshadowing is kind of an accident.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah. You do something and then later like, oh, I can use that.
Yeah.
And it'll look really cool.
Yeah.
But when I put that in, it's just an incidental detail. Yeah. The Squirrel Girl arc has this thing where the first issue involves Deadpool cards, and one gets destroyed by Whiplash, and at the end Galactus gives her a new card. It's a really sweet, heartwarming moment that was completely accidental. I was like, oh, that card got destroyed. What if Galactus gave one? That'd be a nice conclusion to this whole emotional arc. I'm so glad that happened by accident in issue 2. I could pay this off. So I'm making myself look like a horrible writer who gets by accident. And I know the second part to that sentence.
What you're describing is fairly common among writers, that there's a lot of happy accidents that end up producing that quality I was describing at the beginning of the writerly approach.
Yeah, I mean, with Superman, that's really the first time I'm doing a true serialized story. Because with the Avatar stuff, even though it's presented in a serialized way, we do fairly detailed outlines for every 3-issue arc. So every 3-issue arc, kind of, the way we approach it is the way I would approach a graphic novel. You know, I feel like I can foreshadow and do all this stuff. With Superman, it feels a little bit more like an improv. Like, you kind of have to make it up as you go. With the first second stuff, I really feel like with the first second stuff, I can do whatever I want. You know, like I don't even have to hit a page count. I can just and the fact that was the first stuff that I did on a bigger scale, I kind of feel like I was a little bit spoiled by that. You know, like if I want to take out 2 pages, I can just take out 2 pages. If I want to add 5 pages in, I can totally do that. It doesn't like nobody's going to tell me no, right? Like with the Avatar stuff. With Avatar and Superman, what I have to do is I have to use a spreadsheet. I have to use a spreadsheet. So what I'll do is I'll do the outline, and then in the spreadsheet, in one column, this is so nerdy, in one column I will list out like a sentence that describes each scene, and then I'll take a guess at how many pages each scene is going to be, and then I'll do a little formula that tallies all the page counts.
I actually do that exact same
thing.
thing.
Oh, do you really? Yeah.
I do it without a spreadsheet. I should start using a spreadsheet.
I would like to open up to the audience now for questions. Oh, come on. Yes.
So, yeah, as far as Dinosaur Comics, we really touched on that. And I'm amazed by the, length of which that's gone on for years and years. And it's, how do you feel about that? Do you feel like, oh my gosh, if I could just, get 6 more panels, I'd be so happy.
So the question was about Dinosaur Comics, which is a comic I do where it's the same pictures. Yes, the same pictures, and I changed the words. I've been doing that for 12 years. It's better than it sounds.
Yes.
But I remember, like, the first 5 years, basically, was all I did. And I always was like, oh, it'd be nice to have, like, a reaction shot or something, to be able to tell stories with different visuals. And then Adventure Time and Squirrel Girl and the rest really scratched that itch. So I can do different sorts of story beats. And now I really like Dinosaur Comics as sort of this almost haiku structure where there's elements that are going to be involved, and I can play with those or with them or against them. But it doesn't feel like a restriction. It feels like I'm not going to be facing a blank sheet of paper. I'm going to have, T-Rex is probably going to be in tomorrow's Dinosaur Comics.
Yes.
A question about your comments about ambivalence and about writing Superman. I imagine that's really hard because if you have a super person, then you have a villain, like automatically, or you have to.
Yes, yeah, absolutely is. I mean, I think the most compelling villains, this is kind of a cliche, but the most compelling villains are at least heroes in their own mind. So that's something that I try to keep in mind. One of the things about Superman that's difficult is that he's kind of, one iteration of him is that he's kind of perfect, and he's perfect in every way. He's perfect physically, he's perfect morally, he's perfect mentally, and that's just not, for a modern audience, it's very difficult to relate to somebody who's perfect. I mean, that's why people have a hard time relating to me. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel like that's why Marvel kind of took over DC's spot as the #1 comic book company, is because they introduced all of these characters with serious flaws and flaws on multiple levels.
There was a thing Superman used to do in his early days that I always loved. It was so sneaky, where he had super ventriloquism and super control over his facial features, so he could muscle his face to look like someone else if he needed to, and grow his voice.
And that's why people, that was the explanation of why people didn't recognize him with his glasses on.
Yeah.
This question's for Ryan. So I always love the way that you have Squirrel Girl just resolve issues, and you kind of touched on that. One of my favorites is during one of the later issues, there's a character named Hippo, and he is robbing a bank, and after Squirrel Girl's friends basically throw a bunch of hippo puns at him, she decides to offer him a spot in a demolition company instead of robbing banks. And I love the line where he says, if it doesn't work out, I'm going to come back here, I'm going to steal the bank. And I mean the whole bank itself, not just the money. How do you come up with stuff like that? Like framing with framing
Explain
like told
humor.
explain
Well, that's an interesting example.
Yeah.
Because in the outline, she was going to confront the muggers she had in the first issue. I was like, those guys are boring. And so the internet is great for people who don't know a lot about the Marvel Universe or the DC Universe to find out who the bad guys are. So I looked at a list of villains, and I got through like the Magnetos and the Doctor Doom, like who else is there? The very bottom, there's this guy, Hippo. His deal is that he was a hippo who got turned into a human hippo. And he's like, that's his deal. The guy's really sad. Like he's in a zoo where people feed him, and he's got, zoos are not unproblematic, but it's probably pretty peaceful. And now he has to pay bills. And he has to buy his own food, and he's a giant hippo man. So I thought, well, clearly he'd be robbing a bank, because he's frustrated. And the hippo puns just come naturally, so that was a given. And then the conclusion was like Doreen trying to help him out, and she's like, look, you have hippo powers. It's really useful. You could work at a demolition company and knock down buildings and get paid for that. And it was just a sort of way to introduce a fight in that issue that would lead into what's coming next and sort of introduce the characters and stuff. But I just like there's all these, like the idea of the Marvel Universe and the DC Universe being these consistent places where all the stories are happening at once and interact with each other is fun, but also ludicrous. Like, who would live in New York? Superheroes running around on the regular, and like you pass a hippo man on the way into work. They try to steal you or rob a bank. I like the absurdity that's sort of innate to the genre.
Trying to divide among the quadrants here. Giving this side a chance now. Oh, there.
I was just curious, since both of you are working with like big properties, but also have some ties to more independent publishers where you're at NICE, Indie Comic Expo. Can you talk a little bit about like kind of working with the kind of audience and different kind of publishers?
I think my heart is with the independent stuff. My heart is obviously with the stuff that I have 100% control over, right? But what the way I see my Avatar work and my Superman work is that I get to play in somebody else's sandbox with somebody else's toys, and those are really chances for me to learn from other people. Like I feel like I've learned so much from being able to work closely with Mike and Ryan, the creators of Avatar. I get to see how their storytelling sense works. I get to see what it means to tell stories in a confined space. So for them, in their show, they only had 22 minutes to work with, and with the comic, we only had 72 pages to work with. And then with the Superman stuff, working in that shared universe is as absurd as it is, it really is a learning experience. Like you get to figure out how to share toys. Like I get Lois Lane for my first 4 issues, and then I have to give her up, and that forces you to do some problem solving that I wouldn't normally have to do.
Yeah, I've had the same thing with Squirrel Girl, where I say, oh, I want to put Captain America in this issue. And they say, well, we'll check with the Captain America office. An actual office with, like, Captain America inside. And they come back and they say, sure, you can use them, but, just so you know, right now, he's had the super soldier serum sucked out of him, and he's an old man with no powers. And my plan was to have Squirrel Girl beat him up, which works when he's, like, beefy Captain America, when he's an 80-year-old man. That seems a little mean. Or in fact saying, okay, well, I was going to have her beat him up, but that seems mean. I get this message back saying, no, like, he's he's still strong, like he's still a beefy guy. So I had her beat up a senior citizen. But somehow it's a shared universe, and like that's where Captain America is right now. So that's what you work with.
Yes.
So for Yang, is there a specific tone you think you're best at when writing comics? Like, is there one you're most comfortable with?
Oh, is there a tone that I'm most comfortable with?
Yeah.
I'm most comfortable with telling people what to do. I think there is something with my Superman comics. You know, I do think that there is. I think I love Alan Moore and I love Frank Miller, but I think they've set a tone for comics, especially at DC, that I don't necessarily fit. I've always liked J.M. DeMatteis. Do you know who he is? Keith Giffen. They did JLA in the 1980s and 90s, where they played it off as more like a comedy, like a sitcom, you know, and it was hilarious. And I feel like that's kind of they struck this balance between being funny and being dramatic that I really admire, and I think that's where I feel best.
Yeah, it's funny. Here's a theory of writing that I've developed, and the theory is that humor is a easier genre to write in because when you do it correctly, your body tells you by laughing. You're there laughing at your own jokes. This is why I write alone. It's really That's how I know the joke works. And like writing straight up drama, it would be hard because I don't have there's no like drama noise. It's like, oh. So yeah, I like working in comedy because I know when a joke works, at least for me. That's all you can tell. It makes you laugh.
Yeah, you.
So, Ryan, you've got a really large internet presence, like when you got stuck in a hole and Twitter helped you.
Was that not the best thing ever?
My question
Stuck in
is,
a hole.
interacting with your fans online affect your writing at all?
The secret is that usually when I'm hanging out on Twitter, it's because I'm supposed to be writing and it's not going well. And so I take these little breaks where I go on Twitter and hang out with friends and make some jokes. And it does come in handy when you find yourself in a hole. You can get Twitter to help you out of the hole.
This is literal.
I got stuck in a hole. If you Google Ryan North now, it auto-completes to hole. Auto-complete to height.
You made the British newspapers with this one.
But in terms of fan interaction, it's nice to have people just to hang out with when you're writing, because it feels like you're no longer this guy writing alone in a room, you're hanging out with some friends, and when you're hanging with friends, you tell jokes, you get into like a funny mindset. So I find it helps just to have that social experience around writing, even though it's usually a profoundly singular and lonely activity. Internet, fix that. Do you agree?
I have an ambivalent relationship with it. Because sometimes I feel like I'm hanging out with my friends, and sometimes I feel like I'm getting punched in the face. I can never tell which one it's going to be.
Block, 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 block.
Are we at time? Going? Okay. Yes.
Yeah. So I consider comics to be like a combination between languages, both the writing and the visual. And so you seem to do a lot of collaboration with designers as well as doing stuff. So when you're doing collaborations with other artists, how is that like creating this new language and these stories with someone else?
So some of the projects I do both the writing and the drawing, and other projects I only do the writing and somebody else does the drawing. Some of that is because I just don't have enough time to draw everything myself. I'm a really slow artist. And some of that is because I'm just a limited artist. I can only draw in a very specific style. So there are certain stories where I feel like somebody else's style would fit way better, right? Like Stupid Coders, which I recently did. It's drawn by Mike Holmes, who's out there. He's amazing. He has this real Saturday morning energy to him that I can't get that. So I really think that by collaborating, what comes out ends up being an expression of a relationship that you have between you and the other person.
Yeah, I agree 100%. It's funny, the first issue of Adventure Time with Braden and Shelley, I wrote these scripts that had, page 1, the panels are arranged like this, and here's the dialogue. And when I got the pencils back, they completely ignored my layouts. And it was way better. Way better than what I imagined. I never shipped after that. I just said, here are 6 panels, do whatever you want with them. And it's great because, I guess this is obvious, but when you're working in a collaborative medium, people can bring their own strengths to different parts. And I feel like as a writer, I have the easy job, because drawing takes way longer. And I always tell the artist, like, if there's something that I've written that you can think is stupid and can do better, tell me it's stupid and do it better, because it'll make a stronger book. And it makes a stronger book. Like, you don't get back pencils and say, this is worse than I imagined. It's usually always better, which is nice. Last question.
There's this notion, I think, particularly with funny works, that they're supposed to be highbrow or lowbrow. You just pick some point in that. That's why I love Dinosaur Comics, is that it oscillates so well that you do away with the brows altogether. Do you think it's like that notion that you have to pick a point to aim your comedy at is going away, or do you think there's any use to it?
Comedy's really weird because there's trends in it, right? You look at jokes from the 50s, a lot of them don't make sense. You look at jokes from ancient Greece, and some of them still really work. There's a great joke about, I'll tell it the short version. There's a guy named Hippocrates, and his daughter gets married to a king, and he's very happy. They go to a party, the king puts on, and he gets super drunk, and has the equivalent of the Greek lampshade on his head. And the king is like, Hippocrates, you're embarrassing yourself. And the way the story ends is Hippocrates says, Hippocrates doesn't care. And then it ends with, which is the origin of the famous expression, Hippocrates doesn't care. So I feel like there's the idea of there being no brows, which is the first I've heard that expression, I love it, is maybe a thing, like people, the idea of some humor being, so dry and smart that only Lloyd can understand it, and fart jokes being so stupid that only stupid people get them. Like, everyone laughs at fart jokes. Farts are jokes, I should say. A well-timed fart joke is great. So I feel like there's no more brows. You agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't totally even know where that idea came from, because Shakespeare had all sorts of funny things like that. Yeah, like a ton. And then in Asian literature, in Journey to the West, which is considered one of the 4 pillars of Chinese literature, there's peeing and pooping and farting all over the place. So I'm not saying
non-stop.
Yeah. Non-stop monkey poop. And I just don't know where that notion even came from.
Victorians, probably.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you all for coming.